All right, so for today's episode of Don't Discover the Law as a Defendant, I'm going to be discussing what mandatory disclosures and forms you need to have in your rental agreement or lease agreement in California. This is for primarily California. Stepped on my dog's foot. Apologize to the dog. So this is for primarily landlords, but it's also probably good information for a California residential tenant to know, to see if the landlord has left out anything. And the problem that a lot of landlords make is that they tend to reuse their same leases or rental agreements. Oftentimes they're the CAR forms, the California Association of Realtors. I like the CAA forms even better in general. They're both great. But more importantly than which form you use is it has to be a current lease agreement. Okay, so these lease agreements seem like they don't change much, but what does change are the mandatory disclosures and statutory language. And this is where you can get yourself in a bit of a pickle if you're a landlord and you probably don't even know what you don't know because you've been using the same lease agreements and you haven't updated it perhaps since 2020. So it doesn't even have your AB 1482 language in it, which is going to be a big pickle for you to discover at trial that your property that should otherwise be exempt from something like AB 1482 is now inclusive. So the standalone dwelling, the separate property, the single family home is now treated like it's an apartment. So here are some of the mandatory disclosures as of 2022 that need to be included in every lease. And then check back with me next year because there might be some new mandatory language and disclosures. First, Megan's Law database. You need to ensure that your lease or rental agreement includes the Megan's Law database statutory language. Next, you need to ensure that you have language discussing rent payments. So you have to tell the tenant in very clear, unambiguous terms how much the rent is, when is it due, to whom is the rent due, what is the method of payments. Next, you need to ensure that you disclose who the owners of the property are. You also need to include if there's any agent manager, like if the owner has delegated a property manager that is acting on behalf of the property owner. There's a on-premises agent, and for certain types of multifamily, that's an obligation, depending on the number of units. And specifically, who the agents for service of process are. This is because if there's ever litigation that is perhaps commenced by the tenant needs to know where to serve the paper. BEDBUG addendum. This is relatively new. A lot of leases that are in place don't have those. So next, flood hazard disclosure. If there was a flood, if you're in a flood area, you need to disclose that you're in a flooded or flood-prone area. That's pursuant to the California Government Code section 8589.45. And then mold booklet. This is also a relatively recent edition, and you can get this from the state of California. It's pre-printed. It's a good idea to just have this as part of your leases that automatically get printed, and that is pursuant to Health and Safety Code section 26148. So if you want the other civil codes, I'll go through that real quick, just 30 seconds. The Megan's Law database is under Civil Code section 2079.10 alpha. The rent payments, to whom and how, Civil Code section 1962. That's also the same Civil Code section for the language pertaining to the disclosure of owners and agents. And then the Civil Code section for the service of process. In other words, the person to whom court filings and other official filings need to be sent to. That would be under California Civil Code section 1962.7. And then the BEDBUG addendum is Civil Code section 1954.603. So I hope that covers everything that you needed to know about mandatory disclosures for new leases and rental agreements, as well as existing ones that never had these or never had all of these in the first place. If you are renewing your lease, you absolutely have to have these. If the lease was perhaps a multi-year lease that was put in place before these became mandatory statutory obligations, then it's something for you to add as an addendum, to your existing lease to protect yourself as a landlord. Between choosing, maybe it's fine, to absolutely following every tenet of the law, you do the latter and follow these rules, even if you don't think it's necessary and you're going to wait until the next lease renewal. Do it now to protect yourself. Oftentimes it's a formality that seems like it's unimportant until it's litigated and then you wish you would have done it.